Think of your mind as a control room you were born with but rarely taught to operate. Inside that room are levers, dials, and one small, invisible switch, the switch we call mindset. Flip it one way, and the world looks like a fixed map of limits. Talents are given, luck is the deciding factor, setbacks are proof you're not cut out for something. Flip it the other way, and the same world rearranges itself into a landscape of possibility. Skills can be built, setbacks become feedback, and effort compounds into mastery. That flip is quiet, internal, and deceptively simple, but its consequences are seismic. Psychology gives us more than a metaphor here. Neuroplasticity shows that brains change with use. Patterns of thought shape the very wiring of our neural networks. Philosophers have said for centuries that the lens through which we perceive reality determines the reality we experience. Combine the two, and you arrive at a practical, testable truth. What you believe about your capacity and the nature of challenge directly shapes what you become able to do. This is not mystical thinking, it is causal. Belief influences attention, attention influences behavior, behavior sculpts neural pathways, and those pathways make future behavior easier. The switch is the initiating action in that cascade. Now, this isn't about toxic positivity or pretending hardship doesn't hurt. It's about orientation. Two people can face the same setback: a failed business, a lost job, a broken relationship, and the inner commentary makes the difference. One person's inner voice says, "I'm done. This proves I'm not good enough." The other says, "This stung, but what data does it give me? What can I change next?" Both feel pain. Only one grows. The invisible switch isn't the absence of feeling. It's the decision about how to interpret those feelings. There's a philosophical backbone here too. Stoics taught that we don't control events, only our judgments about them. Modern cognitive therapy teaches that cognitive appraisals, the meanings we assign, determine emotional and behavioral outcomes. So the control room isn't fantasy. It's where intentional interpretation happens. When you cultivate the habit of reframing treating problems as information, not indictments, you start to see the world as malleable. That shift changes priorities, energizes learning, and turns curiosity into a steady engine. But flipping the switch once and expecting constant growth is naive. The switch is not a single event, it's a practice. It requires attention to the inputs around you, language you accept from others, the narratives you rehearse in private, the routines that either prime you for scarcity or abundance, what you consume, conversations, media, even the company you keep either feeds the switch or corrodes it. So the real power is in designing your control room. Surround it with evidence of possibility, with mentors who model expansion, with experiments that reward iteration over perfection. And remember, flipping the switch is not about becoming invulnerable to failure. It's about learning to dance with failure so you're not controlled by it. When the switch is on, failure is data. It tells you what adjustments to make. You learn faster, take smarter risks, and accumulate the small wins that change the trajectory of a life. That's the compound interest of an applied mindset. Tiny reframes and tiny actions, sustained, produce exponential results. So if you leave here with one practice, make it simple and tactical. Start noticing the stories you tell yourself the moment something goes wrong. Ask, is this story true? Is it helpful? What can I learn? Replace one unhelpful line with a question that opens possibility. Do that consistently, and you will have literally rewired your control room. Flip the invisible switch deliberately. You are not a passive observer of your life, but the electrician of your future. Think for a moment about two rooms in the same house. One room is dim, the furniture is fixed to the floor, and the windows open only a crack. In that room, people move carefully, afraid to shift anything for fear it will break. The other room is wide open. Furniture can be rearranged, new tools arrive, and the windows swing fully to let in fresh air. Both rooms exist in the same structure. Both are inhabited by people trying to live full lives. The difference between them is not the house, it's the mindset that governs how inhabitants imagine possibility. Carol Dweck named these tendencies fixed and growth. but the core idea is older and deeper than a label. The fixed stance treats ability as destiny, talent is a fixed allocation, success is proof of worth, and failure is confirmation of limitation. The growth stance treats ability as a frontier. Effort expands capacity, setbacks are cartography, and persistence reshapes potential. That's not sugar coating. It's an operational difference in how life's feedback is read and acted upon. Psychology explains why this matters with brutal clarity. When you believe traits are fixed, your attention narrows to self-protection. You avoid challenges that could expose limitations. You interpret criticism as an existential threat rather than information. That pattern conserves short-term ego but sabotages long-term competence. By contrast, when you adopt a growth stance, you reframe threats as experiments. You welcome calibrated criticism because it's data for improvement. You tolerate discomfort because you know neural change true learning requires it. The brain literally grows stronger with that repeated practice. There's moral philosophy woven through this too. If you believe your capacities are fixed, you grant authority to past circumstances as the final judge of your life. You outsource your future to lineage, luck, or a single early event. If you believe capacity can expand, you reclaim agency. Agency isn't mystical. It's a commitment to iterative practice. It's the refusal to let yesterday's limitations script tomorrow's possibilities. That commitment changes how you weigh choices, allocate time, and define identity. We see this in the real world. Entrepreneurs who pivot after a failed launch, athletes who rebuild technique after injury, scientists who revise hypotheses after an experiment. These people operate from a growth orientation. It's not that they don't feel the sting of failure, they do. The difference is what they do next. The fixed-minded person interprets failure as a verdict. The growth-minded person treats it like a lab result. Analyze, adjust, test again. There's a practical interface between belief and behavior here. The language we use, "I'm not good at this," is a static sentence. "I'm not good at this yet," introduces time, learning, and trajectory. That single word yet opens a pathway. It creates a temporal horizon where action matters. Small linguistic shifts create different bodies of behavior. Change the script and you change the rehearsal. But be honest, flipping from fixed to growth isn't instantaneous. It's a discipline that requires deliberate practice and environments that reinforce expansion. If you return to the same rooms, the same people who define you by past proofs, you'll revert. Transformation is social as well as cognitive. Seek mentors who model learning, teams that reward iteration over image, and ritual practices that make learning visible, journals that record experiments, feedback loops that are frequent and kind, and timelines that privilege process over performance. There's also an ethical dimension. Growth mindset carries responsibility. If capacity expands with work and reflection, then certain kinds of resignation become harder to justify. That's uncomfortable. It asks you to accept partial blame for stagnation and to embrace partial credit for progress. But that responsibility is liberating because it is paired with possibility. You can alter outcomes by altering input. So how do you act on this? Start by auditing your language and your company. Replace one fixed phrase with a growth-oriented reframe. Ask for specific feedback and treat it like a map. Set one small stretch goal that obliges you to learn a new skill. Track the micro adjustments and celebrate incremental progress, not just final triumphs. Here's the bottom line. Whether you cling to the dim room or choose the open one is not destiny. It is a choice you make in the way you think, speak, and act. Make that choice deliberately, and you change the architecture of your life. Decide today to trade the comfort of certainty for the courage of becoming. Listen to the voice inside your head for a moment, the one that narrates your morning, comments on meetings, judges your mistakes, and quietly predicts the future. That voice is not neutral. It is the primary architect of your experience. We call it self-talk, but it's more than idle chatter. It is the software that runs your emotional operating system. Change the software, and the machine behaves differently. This is why the internal narrative matters more than most people realize. It filters reality, allocates attention, and prescribes action. Psychology gives this a name, cognitive appraisal, and it's profound in its simplicity. Two people can witness the same event and experience opposite realities because their internal commentary assigns different meanings. One person's inner narrator turns a critique into an attack. The other turns the same critique into diagnostic data. The event hasn't changed, the meaning has. That shift in meaning cascades into feelings, which cascade into behavior, which produce outcomes. The chain is short and causal. That's why interventions that target self, are so effective. You alter a few sentences and you remap the future. There's a philosophical element here too. Narrative philosophers argue that identity is formed by the stories we repeatedly tell about ourselves. If your ongoing story is "I'm unlucky," you will act in ways that make luck seem scarce. If your story is "I learn fast," you will take risks that produce learning. This isn't mystical, it's predictive. Language shapes expectation. Expectation shapes behavior. Behavior shapes competence. Self-talk is the thread that stitches identity into reality. Now, this doesn't mean we should suppress honest emotion or manufacture Pollyanna optimism. The trick is precision. Replace vague condemnations with diagnostic clarity. Instead of "I'm a failure," try "I failed at this task because of X. What can I test next?" That 1-minute rewrite shifts you from shame to analysis. Shame narrows possibility. Analysis opens it. The difference is tactical and immediate. There are practical tools you can use right now. First, label the thought. Naming a thought reduces its unconscious power. Say out loud or in your head, "There's a story saying I'm not enough." That simple act creates space between you and the story. Second, interrogate it. Ask, is this true? What evidence supports it? What evidence contradicts it? Third, reframe with specificity. Swap a global judgment for a targeted plan. "I'm bad at public speaking" becomes "I need a practice plan for slide transitions and pacing." Plan yields action. Action yields improvement. Another technique is to cultivate future-oriented self-talk. Instead of rehearsing what went wrong, rehearse the next right move. The brain doesn't distinguish well between vividly imagined rehearsals and real practice. Neural circuits fire in similar patterns. So rehearsing success in your mind prepares the brain to act differently when opportunity arrives. This is not wishful thinking, it's neural priming. Beware of habitual scripts that live in the background. These are the stories you repeat without inspection because they feel familiar. They show up as automatic reactions: resentment in meetings, withdrawal after criticism, giving up before trying something hard. Those scripts are replaceable, but replacement requires repetition. Small micro-practices build new scripts. A 5-second pause before responding, a journaling prompt at night that asks, "What did I learn today?" A short morning mantra that defines the day's operating principle. Rituals wire new narrative habits. There's also social architecture to consider. Our internal narrative is influenced by the voices we consume. Conversations, books, and media that normalize scarcity will reinforce scarcity scripts. Seek inputs that model curiosity, resilience, and precise language. Surround yourself with people who ask diagnostic questions rather than deliver verdicts. Finally, remember that self-talk is not an abstract virtue, it's a lever you can pull to change outcomes. It's a running commentary you can edit. Start small. Interrupt one unhelpful sentence today. Replace it with a question that opens possibility, and act on the smallest resulting impulse. Over time, those tiny edits become a different operating system. Change the story you live in, and you change the life you lead. Make today the day you start editing. When the ground tilts beneath your feet, a project collapses, a relationship fractures, the future suddenly looks foggy, your mindset determines whether you are pushed into panic or pulled into possibility. Uncertainty and failure are part of the human condition. They are the raw materials of growth if you have the capacity to work them. The difference between someone who is flattened by a setback and someone who is forged by it is rarely talent alone. It's the interpretive stance they bring to the event. Do they see disaster or data, loss or lesson? The quality of that stance changes everything that follows. Psychology teaches us that uncertainty triggers the limbic system, fear, anxiety, and narrowing of attention. That narrowing is adaptive when a tiger appears, but maladaptive when the threat is complex, ambiguous, and long-term. A dysregulated response turns thinking inward, stifles creativity, and prompts avoidance. Conversely, a regulated response creates a widened lens. Curiosity replaces catastrophe. Hypothesis replaces humiliation. The skill we need is not to eliminate fear that is impossible, but to channel it. Use it as signal, not sentence. There's a philosophical lineage for this too. The Stoics argued that we do not control events, only our responses. That's not passive resignation. It's strategic concentration of energy. Epictetus didn't advise ignoring hardship. He advised reallocating emotional resources to what can be influenced. Modern behavioral science echoes the same structure. Locus of control matters. When you habitually focus on what you can change your interpretations, your next actions, your learning questions, you preserve willpower for effective work instead of wasting it on rumination. Failure, when framed properly, is feedback. Think like a scientist. A failed experiment doesn't mean the hypothesis was foolish. It means one variable behaved differently than expected, and now you have information. This reframing is tactical. Instead of a binary success/failure judgment, generate precise data points. What worked, what didn't? Under what conditions did the result change? That pivot from global judgment to granular analysis transforms emotion into strategy. Practically, there are methods to train this response. Start with a short cool-down ritual when crisis appears. Breathe for 60 seconds, label the dominant emotion, and identify one controllable next step. That tiny structure interrupts reactive spirals and creates forward motion. Use a pre-mortem, before risky moves. Imagine the plan has failed and ask why. That exercise surfaces hidden vulnerabilities and reduces surprise. After a setback, conduct a rapid A/B style debrief. List hypotheses, design 2 small experiments, pick one to run within a week. Iteration beats inertia. Another asset is a tolerance for ambiguity, the psychological muscle that lets you hold 2 competing truths. This hurts and I can learn from it. Tolerance grows through exposure. Practice sitting with small uncertainties on purpose. Take a new route to work. Try a hobby where you'll likely look clumsy, or intentionally delay making a trivial decision to feel discomfort and survive it. Each tiny exposure builds neural proof that uncertainty is survivable, even fertile. There's social architecture here as well. People who recover quickly tend to have candid communities that normalize struggle and reward iteration. If your circle treats failure as disqualifying, you will hide mistakes and stunt learning. Seek relationships and teams that offer blunt, compassionate feedback, and that model rebound. The culture around you either magnifies fear or diffuses it. Finally, remember that courage is not the absence of fear. It is action in its presence. The most consequential decisions in business, art, and life happen in uncertainty. If you wait for full clarity, you will often miss the window. The mindset that thrives in uncertainty treats ambiguity as the raw material of advantage. Whoever learns the fastest in unclear conditions often wins. So when the next setback arrives, don't ask why me, ask what now. Convert pain into inquiry, inquiry into experiments, experiments into progress. That is how uncertainty stops being a prison and becomes a workshop for possibility. Act on what you can control, learn from what you can't, and let the friction of failure become the forge of your future. Habits are the wiring that keeps the invisible switch flipped. Inspiration lights the initial spark, but unless it's translated into repeatable actions, the spark fades and the old circuits reassert themselves. If mindset is an operating system, habits are the background processes that keep it running smoothly. They are small, often invisible choices that, compounded daily, produce dramatic change. The good news is that you don't need heroic willpower to maintain a growth-oriented mindset. You need smart scaffolding and a few high-leverage rituals. Start with the architecture of cues. The brain is lazy by design. It looks for triggers and routines that conserve energy. Use that tendency to your advantage by building visible cues into your environment. Put a notebook on your pillow to prompt evening reflection. Place a short list of micro-goals where you'll see them first thing in the morning. Remove or hide items that prime scarcity and reactivity. Unfollow accounts that feed anxiety. Move the TV remote out of reach, or replace doom scrolling with a 5-minute reading habit. Small adjustments to your physical and digital context change what your attention defaults to, and attention is where mindset lives. Understand the habit loop cue, routine, reward, and design it deliberately. If you want to cultivate resilience, choose a short routine that reliably follows a stress cue. For example, when a difficult email arrives cue, pause for 2 deep breaths and write 1 line of curiosity about the sender's perspective routine. Then give yourself a 1-minute positive note in your journal reward. The reward can be as simple as the relief of clarity or the tiny dopamine burst of checking something off. What matters is consistency. Repeat the micro-routine enough times that it becomes automatic under pressure. Practice identity-based habits, not just outcome-based ones. Saying I'm the kind of person who learns creates a different internal economy than I want to be better at X. Identity predicates behavior. Choose small actions that reinforce who you want to be. Read 3 pages nightly if you want to be a learner. Give 1 focused compliment daily if you want to be generous. Practice a 5-minute focused breathing routine if you want to be composed. Over time, those acts accumulate into a self-conception that supports the mindset you've chosen. Ritualize reflection. Growth requires feedback loops, and reflection is the simplest, cheapest feedback system you own. End each day with 3 quick questions. What worked? What didn't? What will I change, manana? Keep the answers short bullets, not essays, to ensure the ritual lasts. That nightly micro-debrief rewires attention toward learning and away from rumination. It makes progress visible and turns small wins into the psychological momentum that sustains effort. Design accountability into the system. Habits stick faster when they are social. Tell someone you respect about a micro-goal, schedule a weekly check-in, or join a group that values iteration over image. Public commitment increases the cost of quitting and heightens the reward of persistence. The right kind of accountability also supplies corrective feedback, the blunt mirror we need to course correct quickly. Use the power of stacking. Attach a new habit to a pre-existing routine so the old routine cues the new one. After your morning coffee, spend 2 minutes on intention setting. After brushing your teeth at night, write 1 sentence about what you learned that day. Stacking reduces friction because it leverages already established neural pathways, making the new habit less of a battle. Finally, be ruthless about small wins and generous with grace. Celebrate incremental progress publicly and privately. These celebrations are not vanity, they are reinforcement signals that encourage repetition. At the same time, when you miss a day, don't moralize it into failure. Treat it as a data point. Why did the habit break? Fix the environment, lower the friction, and try again. Habits are not moral tests, they are engineering problems. Sustainability beats intensity. You don't need dramatic overhaul, you need durable systems that favor the mindset you want. Install simple cues, design tiny routines, anchor them to identity, reflect, invite accountability, and iterate. Over months, those micro-practices will stop being tasks and start being the operating system that keeps the invisible switch on. Choose 1 tiny habit right now, attach it to something you already do, and never underestimate how quietly powerful small consistency can be. When a single person flips that invisible switch, the change rarely stays contained to their inner life. Mindset is less like a solitary light bulb and more like a stone dropped into a pond. Concentric circles travel farther than you expect. One alteration in how you interpret yourself and the world ripples through decisions, relationships, work, and even the culture you inhabit. The reason is simple and elegant. Small changes in interpretation change attention. Changed attention changes behavior. Changed behavior changes results, and new results rewrite your identity. That cascade, repeated and amplified by social feedback, is how a private flip becomes public transformation. Think about it practically. If you begin to see setbacks as information rather than indictments, your calendar fills differently. You stop avoiding challenging projects and start taking on experiments with constrained risk. Those experiments generate learning, which improves competence, which produces outcomes that others notice. Colleagues begin to treat you as a person who adapts rather than a person who collapses under pressure. That new reputation opens doors, new responsibilities, collaborations, or chances to mentor. The original internal shift didn't suddenly conjure a promotion. It changed the pattern of action that made promotion likely. That's the ripple in a career. The same logic applies to relationships. If your baseline interpretation becomes curiosity over judgment, conversations deepen. Instead of reacting to perceived slights, you ask clarifying questions. That reduces escalation and opens space for vulnerability. People respond to vulnerability with trust, not because vulnerability is inherently noble, but because it signals safety and reciprocity. Over time, your social world reorganizes around a new currency: candor, learning, repair. Families, teams, and friendships are ecosystems. One changed node influences the network. On health and habit formation, the ripple is equally powerful. A mindset that prioritizes incremental improvement turns nutrition, sleep, and exercise into experiments rather than moral tests. You stop oscillating between extremes and adopt practices that accumulate. Micro decisions compound into physiological changes. Better sleep yields clearer thought yields better choices, and those choices loop back into improved resilience. Behavior and biology are not separate domains. They co-evolve under the influence of mindset. There's also a philosophical dimension. When one person changes their stance, they change the moral grammar available in their immediate environment. Despair and blame are linguistic options. So are responsibility and hypothesis. The words we use structure what we can imagine doing. When you replace explanations that absolve with explanations that enable, you expand the realm of possible action in the people around you. That linguistic shift is contagious because humans learn by imitation and social reinforcement. People mimic not only actions but the interpretations attached to them. Systems thinking helps us see scale. Organizations and communities are aggregations of individual mindsets. If enough individuals adopt a growth orientation, the system's incentives, feedback loops, and norms shift. Performance metrics favor learning, reviews prioritize development, and risk becomes a managed resource rather than an existential threat. That's how cultures transform, not by mandates, but by the accumulation of tiny interpretive shifts that change behavior and then structure. Yet the ripple is not automatic, it needs direction. Change the switch privately and then model the change publicly. Share your learning, invite feedback, and make your experiments visible. When people see someone tolerate failure, analyze it, and iterate, they receive permission to do the same. Leadership, in this sense, is contagious demonstration. The person who shows how to process setbacks gives others a template for action. So where do you begin if you want your flip to ripple outward? Start with one observable practice. Make one part of your life an experiment and narrate it publicly to one person or group. Track the results and share the learning. That public ledger transforms private change into social proof, and social proof accelerates adoption. Your single switch is never merely personal. It propagates through attention, behavior, reputation, and structure. Choose what kind of pond you want to create ripples in your career, your family, your team, your community, and drop the stone with intention. Decide to flip the switch, practice visibly, and watch one small, steady change become the force that reshapes everything around you.